Maria Eagle.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. This is the first time that any government has brought forward legislation to tackle what went wrong at Hillsborough, and it's a fulfilment of a Labour manifesto commitment, a commitment by my right honourable friend the Prime Minister, and I congratulate him for it. I rise to support the legislation. The duty of candor with effective sanctions and equality of arms are all good. They will make a difference. But I think the bill should also seek to boost the powers and capabilities of the office of the new independent public advocate, and I want to explain why. I was first elected to this House in May of 1997, and I've been making speeches about the Hillsborough disaster and its aftermath ever since that time, more than 28 years ago. But the disaster happened a full 8 years before even I was elected all that time ago. And I got to know some of the bereaved families as a trainee lawyer in Liverpool only a year after the disaster in 1990, as they sought to recover damages for nervous shock. This was a way of reaching a legal finding of culpability against the police. They didn't want to make money. They wanted the police to accept the blame that they should have accepted. This is one of a number of legal actions that were ongoing at the time. And I worked on some of these cases at the direction of my principal, who was on the steering committee of solicitors conducting that civil litigation. I didn't have conduct, but I was familiar with matters and met some of the families at the time. Now, some of those bereaved families became constituents of mine when I was elected in 1997. And indeed, some of the very first meetings I had with constituents as an MP after my election were with members of the executive of the Hillsborough Family Support Group. Then it was Trevor and Jenny Hicks, Hilda and Phil Hammond and Doreen Jones, who between them lost 5 family members at Hillsborough. 4 of them were my constituents, and 3 of them still are, all these years later. And I think that my long and close involvement with some of the families gives me some insight into what went wrong. And I've got some observations. My first observation about the disaster, and I've alluded to it already, is that the legal system, the entire justice system, showed itself to be totally unable to deal properly with the aftermath or even fulfil its basic functions in the face of a national disaster. This disaster unfolded live on TV. We all saw what happened, and it was at a very high-profile national event. There was a large appetite in society to get to the bottom of what had happened. The interim report of the public inquiry by Lord Justice Taylor had, within 4 months of the disaster occurring, correctly identified the loss of police control as the main cause of the disaster, excoriated South Yorkshire Police for their attempt to evade responsibility for what occurred by trying to blame Liverpool fans, and told them to modify their behaviour. That is where truth and accountability could have been established. But South Yorkshire Police simply ignored the public inquiry finding and used all subsequent legal proceedings, all paid for out of public money with expensive lawyers doing the job, and most notably at the first inquest, to redouble their efforts to evade responsibility. So 8 years of legal action had failed to get to the truth by the time I was elected in 1997. And there was no justice for those involved, particularly for those who, as we now know, were unlawfully killed at Hillsborough. There wasn't a sniff of accountability for those whose gross failings had led to the disaster, or for those whose subsequent behaviour in blaming the victims and survivors led to so much anguish over so many years for so many families and survivors. This is despite the fact that every possible kind of legal action had been undertaken in that time. None of them worked. Once the justice system gets it wrong and appeals, JRs don't succeed, it's almost impossible to get it right subsequently using the same system. It seemed like the truth didn't matter to the justice system. The justice system was content to settle on a lie, with inquest verdicts of accidental death, no criminal or disciplinary proceedings for those at fault. It was content to allow the perpetrators to peddle the appalling falsehoods that Liverpool fans being drunk, late and ticketless were what caused the disaster. This was a South Yorkshire police cover story. This was what the systematic changing of police statements was aiming at establishing as the truth. This effort failed spectacularly at the public inquiry and was repudiated within 4 months of the disaster. But the justice system allowed the perpetuation of this mendacious false narrative by those who'd been identified as at fault, senior South Yorkshire police officers. So, the first inquests, allowed ongoing reports in the newspapers for over a year about the inquest proceedings, firmly to establish the false narrative in the public mind as what was true. It was as if the public inquiry and its findings had never happened. So those who caused the disaster were retired early on enhanced pensions. Society got the impression that the disaster was about football hooliganism and the unlawful killings were said to be just an accident, despite the findings of Lord Justice Taylor in the public inquiry. That's where the justice system and the lawyers and judges got us to. The way I see it, the justice system might properly be said to have failed in all respects and at every turn in the most appalling miscarriage of justice imaginable. The legal system failed. Multiple lawyers, judges and causes of action failed to get to the truth, failed to do so in a timely fashion, and failed to make those responsible accountable. It failed the bereaved families, it failed the survivors, and it failed those who had died. So to the extent that this bill suggests that more lawyers and an equality of arms before the law is enough to guarantee truth and justice, I say it is not enough. That is one of the main lessons of Hillsborough to me. And I say it as a lawyer, because I am indeed a lawyer. So it's a good thing that there's an equality of arms to be set up in legal proceedings. It's a good thing that families can get the help that they need, and I support this. But does not that guarantee truth, justice or accountability? Now, I've met many families bereaved by public disasters, not just those affected at Hillsborough, the MV Derbyshire families, the Alder Hay organ scandal families, Manchester Arena bombing families, and they all want pretty much the same thing. They want the truth, they want it as quickly as possible. They want accountability for those at fault, not official cover-ups. They don't want any other families to go through what they've endured. They all say that. They want lessons learned and what went wrong put right for the future. Now that, it's simple. It's not too much to ask. It's the 3 tests by which I judge the adequacy of legislation which sets out to learn the lessons of Hillsborough, including this legislation. Now, let me just say briefly, Madam Deputy Speaker, I was a sponsor of the Public Authorities Accountability Bill introduced in 2017 by Andy Burnham, which was the precursor to this legislation. I can see nothing wrong at all with having a duty of candor in statute. It helps get across to public officials subject to it the importance of telling the truth to inquiries and investigations, and that their function should be carried out with candor, transparency and frankness. I would have hoped they would have all known this anyway, but apparently some of them need to be reminded. And I note that this legislation takes rather more pages over establishing a duty than the original bill, but I've got no doubt that these changes and their import will be fully scrutinised in committee and we can understand fully what the intention is. I know there'll be significant interest in this legislation, not only in this House but in the other place. The Public Authorities Accountability Bill, Andy Burnham's bill, is something that Bishop James Jones in his 2017 report, The Patronising Disposition of Unaccountable Power, about the lessons learned from Hillsborough, recommended enacting, along with his 24 additional points of learning. However, lying liars are going to lie. And whilst I am not convinced that had this legislation been in place at the time of Hillsborough, that the cover-up wouldn't have been attempted, I'm gratified to see, and it's certainly the case, there would have been more opportunities to punish those caught lying when they were caught. And I think that the more serious punishments in this bill for breaching the duty of candour are a good thing. But would it have stopped the cover-up or the long years of agony endured by families and survivors? We have to take this opportunity, it'll be the only one, to enact legislation that has a chance of achieving this. Now, I've spent the last few years trying to tackle the way in which we deal with the aftermath of disasters from a slightly different angle. Since 2016, I've been introducing to this House the Independent Public Advocate Bill, which I've worked on with Lord Wills in the other place. He's been introducing it there since 2014. This followed on work we did with some Hillsborough families and those affected by other disasters prior to drafting our bill. It arises out of the following insight. Just as the legal system fails repeatedly in the aftermath of disasters, the Hillsborough Independent Panel, established in 2009 by the Labour government of Gordon Brown after the 20th anniversary of Hillsborough, and reporting in 2012 under the Conservative government, which had allowed it to complete its work despite the era of austerity, thanks in large part to Theresa May. This succeeded spectacularly and finally had the truth established in the public consciousness that the South Yorkshire Police had tried to cover up for all those years. The fans were not at fault. The police caused the disaster. Many of those who died could have been saved had they received timely medical assistance. The police engaged in an appalling cover-up and set out to deflect blame from themselves onto fans, including by attempting a wholesale revision of police witness statements to better reflect the cover-up story and to erase any statements which seemed to point the blame at senior officers. They also took blood alcohol readings, even from the children who died, and the youngest was 10, let's remember, to try and smear them as somehow at fault. There were shocking revelations in the report, and it led to the immediate reappraisal of the public view of what had occurred. It led to an apology to the families by David Cameron, the Prime Minister of the day, and the striking down of the accidental death inquest verdicts, which were eventually substituted with unlawful killing verdicts, but not before South Yorkshire Police had again tried to tell their cover-up story over an agonising 2-year legal process for the second inquests. This was a terrible ordeal for families and only concluded in 2016. Now, the Hillsborough Independent Panel was not a legal proceeding. It was about the transparent release of documents, freedom of information, and a narrative account arising out of the study of the documents. There weren't lawyers involved. The bill I kept introducing to this House was to enable a public advocate in the event of disasters to assist families to get to the truth much sooner by being able to replicate such a process, but at a much earlier stage in the aftermath of disasters. I believe this will promote the telling of truth at a much earlier stage because shining the light of transparency on the activity of public officials in the aftermath of a disaster will torpedo cover-ups before they can get very far, and at a significantly lower cost to the public purse and faster than our justice system has shown itself able to manage. The Hillsborough Independent Panel did it in 2 years, and they did in 2 years what the justice system had failed to do in 24 years. I think this kind of proceeding has the potential to enable families to sidestep the years of overlapping legal actions they get caught up in after public disasters, and I think it will be a useful addition to the armoury of families who want the truth quickly, accountability quickly, and lessons to be learned. I think that families bereaved by public disasters should have an option of asking for such a process at a much earlier stage in the aftermath, and it should be up to them if they want it to be done. A version of the Independent Public Advocate was enacted by the previous government towards the end of its time in office, and an appointment to the office has been made by the current government. However, I do not believe that she has sufficient powers or sufficient resource to do the job my bill envisaged. I may well try to explore in committee where it is in order what can be done about that. I believe provisions on the Independent Public Advocate would increase the range of options for bereaved families in the aftermath of public disasters like Hillsborough. It would mean that families have a greater choice about how to take forward their efforts, and it would be a good addition. The truth, quickly. Accountability, not cover-up. Justice for those affected. Lessons learned and swiftly implemented, so no one else has to suffer the same way. This is what families want, and this bill must be judged on how well it promotes those aims. I think it will do so very well.
Members can see that this debate is heavily subscribed, so when I get to backbenchers, speeches will be limited to 6 minutes. And I now come to the Liberal Democrat spokesperson, Jess Brown-Fuller.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and it's a privilege to follow the honourable member from Liverpool Garston. Thank you for her impassioned speech and shining a light on a broken system since 1997. Today is her day as much as it is the day for all those campaigning for change. On the 15th of April